In this video, we'll look at the faster way of calculating measures of spread using built-in Excel functions. Again, these help to make sure you don't make any errors and get the right values. You need two functions to find the range, both the maximum and the minimum, and then you need to find the difference between them because there's no built-in formula directly for the range in Excel. The same for the interquartile range. First, you have to find the quartiles, which are the first 25 and 75% of the data, then find the difference between those values. Also, for the standard deviation and variance, we have two formulas for each because there are differences in the formulas depending on if you have sample or population data because you're dividing by a different amount. So we specify the sample formulas with a .s for standard deviation and variance, and the population ones with a .p. How you use the formulas in Excel is the same, they just have slightly different names. And they've got short forms. Instead of being called standard deviation, they're stdev, and instead of being called the variance, it's called var. Let's look at how we can find all of these measures of spread for our amount spent variable for our budget. We're going to assume this is a population data set for everything you spend money on in a quarter. That's 3 months of the year. So first we're going to do the range, where you literally have to do the max first, so find the maximum amount spent, and minus the minimum of amount spent. Then press enter, and that's going to be your range for the data set. It's pretty large, $1,566.55, because we spend so much on the mortgage and then so little on some other things, like coffee from Tim Hortons. Next, we'll find the IQR, which is extremely similar to the range, except for finding the max and the min. We need to find the difference between 75% of the data and 25% of the data. To do that, we use the quartile function, where first we find the first 75%, which is the third quartile. So the second argument we put in is 3 for 75% of the data, and then minus quartile with our amount spent values. But this time, for the number of the quartile, we put in 1, which means the first 25%. So 75% of the data minus 25%. And you'll always use these same arguments, 3 and 1, for the actual quartile. And there's our IQR, a lot smaller than the range because we're cutting out the biggest and the smallest values and instead using those more middle 25% of the data. For standard deviation, you always start with equals std, and then you decide between the p and the s based on if you have population or sample data. We said we're going to assume this is for the entire quarter, so it's a population data set, so I use .p, select my amount spent values, and press enter. And there's my standard deviation. For the variance, it's just the square of the standard deviation, so you can either take this value and square it, or you can use var.p, because we're, again, assuming population data. Select the values, press enter. And there is the variance. Notice that it is extremely large because it would actually be measured in dollars squared. So the range, IQR, and standard deviation are all measured in dollars, but the variance would be dollars squared. So it is much larger. And that is the faster way of calculating our measures of spread using Excel functions instead of the theoretical formulas.